Hi everybody, welcome to another video. In today's video, I'm going to share with you my personal knowledge management system and how I use Zotero, Joplin and Cheap Notebooks. Now I've already done a video on personal knowledge management systems. You can find a link to the video somewhere on the screen or in the show notes, or of course over on cultivatedmanagement.com. But today I'm going to show you a sort of revised and refreshed version. That last video I did was about 2 years ago. I still use the 4 C's of the model, so that's capture, curate, crunch and contribute. So those 4 things are still there, but before we jump into those, to give you a bit of a summary of them, let's have a think about what a PKMS is, or a personal knowledge management system. So essentially it's a system, a series of tools, you could call it, with containers, and in those containers are bits of information, data, resources, learning notes, with some rules on how you process them. So, it's a very personal thing, and that's why it's called a personal knowledge management system, of course. But I'm going to share with you mine today, and I'm going to couch it around these 4 C's. So the first one is capture. So capture is the essence of any of these systems. Where are you going to get your information, your learning resources from? So we talk about capture in the terms of it could be a web page that's interesting to you, or some notes from a book or a science article, or maybe you're at a conference and you're scribbling down notes. These are all forms of capture. It's easy and it's tempting with today's digital landscape to capture the entire internet into your personal knowledge management system, but that's a bit of a silly thing to do. But we do often capture a lot more than maybe we're going to process, and that is why we have the second stage, which is the curate. Now, curate is essentially about asking a question about each potential input that you've captured. What do I want to do with this? So it may be that you want to process this further and actually turn it into knowledge, which we'll talk about in a minute. It could be that you just want it for reference, in which case we can archive it or store it or put it into a commonplace book, a commonplace folder. I've done a video on commonplace before. It could be that you still want to process it, do a bit more research. There's all sorts of different things we do at this curate stage. But essentially we're asking, what do we want to do with this piece of information? So assuming I want to keep these pieces of information, I want to now turn that information into knowledge, and I have to put it into action. So the whole point of a personal knowledge management system for me is for me to get smarter, not just intellectually and become a walking, talking encyclopedia that can argue with anybody about any topic because I know it so well. No, the real goal for me is to change my behaviors, to become a better person because of this information. Now, of course, I'm going to want to recall theories and models and ideas, but ultimately I'm also trying to put that information into action to create knowledge. And for me, that's the crunch bit. Now, we're not going to talk too much about the crunch bit in this video because I've already done several videos on this before, as well as loads and loads of articles at cultivatedmanagement.com. We then go from crunch, where we've sort of become part of us, we've assimilated it, we've accommodated it, we've changed our behaviors because of the information that we now have. And we then go to the 4th C, which is contribute. Now, for me, it's really a bit of a shame if people know lots of stuff and they don't share it with other people. So this could be teaching, mentoring, it could be actually bringing it into the workplace to exhibit the things that you've learned. You might have learned a new way to run marketing campaigns, for example. In which case, bring it to the workplace and show people how it works. It could be through blogs and videos, conferences, tutorials, workshops, mentoring, coaching, consulting. That's my kind of sphere of work. That's how I contribute back stuff that I know. So they're the 4 C's. We've got capture, where we capture things. We've got curate, where we ask, what do we want to do with this information? We've got crunch, where we turn it into knowledge. And then we've got contribute, where we give back to others. Now, as we go through this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into each of the tools that I use. So we're going to cover Joplin, we're going to cover Zotero, we're going to cover very briefly Google Docs, and there's a reason why I use that tool. And we're also going to cover Cheap Notebooks. Joplin is essentially a digitized note-taking system, a tool for doing that. I consider it, if you're familiar with Evernote, it's an equivalent to Evernote, but it's much better. It's more streamlined, more effective, quicker, doesn't grind to a halt, and it's free. It's an open source tool. Now I use Joplin, I've used it for a couple of years now. It's super powerful, it can capture notes, it can do all sorts, but it's a pretty straightforward tool. And we'll jump a little bit more into Joplin in a minute. I'm just going to give you a summary of these tools to start with. Now, Joplin can synchronize onto mobile devices via a little Dropbox file. And Joplin also has a paid for cloud model where basically you pay a subscription and you don't need that Dropbox integration. You get it on your mobile, iPads, tablets, laptops. It's a ubiquitous tool. So Zotero, if you've never heard of it, they call themselves, and I'm just going to look this up on my notes, a personal research assistant. Now, essentially, it's a way of capturing anything you wish, books, websites. It can capture the reference parts of that, all the metadata. For anything that you have, you can add stuff manually, or you can use the little browser plugins to capture things for you. And we'll jump a little bit more into Zotero. In a sense, I use it for almost everything. So I use Joplin for things that aren't related to studying and learning necessarily about my professional world. And I use Zotero for everything else. I actually use it really as a bookmarking tool as well, because it's pretty powerful for that. So again, there's desktop apps, there's mobile apps, there's, browser extensions and all sorts of cool stuff. I actually pay about £15 a year for the extra storage, because I've got lots of citations. It's a big research library for my own work. Now, Google Docs, I'm not a huge fan of the Google product suites, but I do use Google Docs for a couple of reasons. One, I can write things offline using Google Offline, so I can write on an airplane or wherever I've got no internet, and then it synchronizes, so that's quite a powerful little tool to use. I actually like the interface more than, say, Microsoft Word, etc., so there's some benefits there. But also it's got a really cool Zotero plugin, which we'll talk about in a minute. And many of you may know that I'm actually a bit of an analog stationery freak. I'm actually the co-host of a wildly and unpredictably successful podcast called Stationery Freaks. So feel free to check that out if stationery is your bag and you like listening to myself and my co-host Helen rambling on about stationery and the potential that analog and stationery brings for us. But I love stationery and I love learning by writing. Now, of course, when I'm in Zotero, and we'll cover this in a minute, I'm going to be doing more digital stuff, but my preference is always for handwritten notes. So let's say, for example, I'm watching a video on YouTube or Domestika, which is addictive, by the way, I will give you that heads up, and I am making some notes and I will use my cheap notebooks for those notes. They're a first draft note. Therefore, they don't have to be neat. They don't have to be, readable by anybody else. They just need to be my first capture of notes. Those notes eventually, ultimately, end up in Zotero against the reference for the video or the source that I'm learning from. But ultimately, these cheap notebooks are just scrap notebooks for capturing learning notes, doodles, etc. So they're the tools. So let's jump in a little bit more into Joplin. I'll show you around the interface very briefly. It's got some really snazzy ways of capturing a website. And as you can see here on the B-roll, I'm capturing a page off my own website in multiple different ways. We can capture a simplified version, we can capture the full HTML, we can capture screen grabs of it, we can capture the URL, we can capture all sorts. It's a really smart browser plugin. You can't do that on mobile, but you can on the website, so that's pretty powerful stuff. And in here I capture things that are really reference material. So for example, hashtags to use on Instagram or LinkedIn, camera settings, inspiring things. Here's the Kurt Vonnegut, I don't think I said his name right there, really cool little letter that he wrote back to a school child that wrote to him. Just things, reference things that I want to look back on, as well as all sorts of family life log kind of things, activities we've done, bills we've paid, memorable moments, even got archives of all the boys singing from when they were younger. So it's kind of like this personal library of sort of productivity stuff for my own life as a record, but also things to do. I also capture potential learning resources to do. So as you can see, these are all Open University links, and these are to free courses. Now, the course content isn't in here, it's just a URL. It's just something to remind me to go and do this thing. When I sit that course, all of that course information and all of my notes, well, they go into Zotero. So Joplin is really more for personal stuff than it is for anything else. So moving on to Zotero. Zotero is really for anything that I want to use now to learn, but also potentially anything I want to reference or use again in the future for learning. So it's essentially become my bookmarking tool. So any interesting article that I find that I might not read there and then, but I want to read later, get stored in Zotero. I also store all of my Kindle notes as well, although I don't read too much on the Kindle now. I think I actually prefer going back to physical books and just sort of scribbling in the margins, marginalia as it's called, and then photoing those, or photoing, is that a word? Taking photographs of those pages and again uploading those into Zotero against the reference for that book. So let's have a look at the interface here. Pretty much everything goes into this exclamation mark to process collection. Now they're called collections, you could look at them as folders, but everything goes into there to be processed. And the reason I have the exclamation mark on there is so that it always appears at the top of the list. It's just a simple little hack. Now everything goes into there to be processed, and then I have a series of collections over on the side, as you can see on the screen, but I don't really tend to use those too much because for example, some sources of information might exist in multiple different collections, and I don't really want to add it to all those different collections, so I actually generally tend to use the tagging feature way more in Zotero than I do in maybe Joplin, for example. Generally speaking, it goes into process. If it's a really obvious, it's only to do with communication, then it might move to the communication collection, or it will pretty much just end up in the commonplace folder, which is a big dumping ground for everything eventually, once I've processed it. A lot of that stuff I've already processed, by the way. It might look like a huge list. I've just got to get around to tagging it, curating it, which is a bit of a task in itself. So, try and stay on top of it whilst you're doing it if you can. I haven't in this example, so I will have to at some point go through all of those to process, look at the ones I already have done and then assign them into the right collections, or just dump them in the commonplace with the relevant tags, which is likely to happen. Now, as you can see on the screen, I've got these folders that are called Z something. The Z again is just so I can find it easily. Now these relate to existing or current articles that I'm writing so that I can quickly reference those from Google Docs, which we'll jump into in a minute. I can easily find them. They're all Z and they're all related to a particular article that I'm writing at the moment. So I'll do some research, find some articles, put them into this collection, and then I can reference the whole collection using the bibliography tools, etc. So as you can see on the right hand side of the screen is the metadata. So this is where Zotero really is super powerful. You can see that there is metadata associated to the things that are captured. It might not always be complete, and Zotero does a pretty good job of trying to get all of that information, but you may need to add like authors, locations, etc. yourself, which you can do, and you can override what Zotero has pulled from the source already. So that's a really powerful tool for keeping those citations crisp and clear and clean so that you're referencing the right people at the right time when you are referencing anything. So I use the Chrome browser plugin to capture things in Zotero. It's pretty good, pretty powerful. It does a pretty good job of capturing what it can do from the source that you've got. So let me talk about capturing websites. So as you're going to see on the B-roll, when you capture a website for Zotero, it doesn't keep a copy of that website locally. So if you click on the reference that you've captured, the item that you've captured, it will try and open that website again in a browser, which is fine, obviously, if you connect it to the internet, etc. However, there's one particular feature of Zotero that I absolutely love, and this is gold, and it's the annotation and then creating notes from it feature, which you obviously can't do on a live website. So if I'm capturing a PDF research article and it lands in Zotero, it will keep a local copy of it, and I can annotate and then create notes, which I'll show you in a minute. But a website's a bit different because obviously it's going to open it into a browser and I can't do that. So what I generally tend to do in these situations is I merely print the website itself to PDF to save a PDF version of that website, and then I can drag that onto the item in Zotero and I've got a local copy of a PDF. Now here's where it really comes into its own, because I can then open that PDF or any PDF that I've got, and I can use the highlight feature. Now this is where you just simply select the text and choose a highlight color. Can be any color you want, whatever makes sense for you. And then the really gold bit is to go back to the item, right click, and then create note from annotations. And here's what it does. It gives you all of the things you selected as a note attached to that item. So this is brilliant. You could be reading a 1,000-page research article, or a 100-page book, or a 25-page website, whatever. And you can highlight the bits that you really want to come back to, that you want to reference somewhere. You might want to use a quote from something. You might really want to pull out some detail there to include in an article that you're writing. And there it is. It's all there for you. You just highlight it, create notes from it. And this is a really nice way of essentially pulling out the things that are super important to what you're trying to achieve. Now, of course, with Zotero, it's a referencing citation tool as well. So you can create bibliographies from either separate articles or for the whole collection if you really wish. Now, I don't tend to use these features much because I use the Zotero plugin in Google Drive, which we'll jump into in a minute, to show you how you can do that within the document that you're writing itself. So let's jump into Google Docs. This is where I write almost all of my video scripts, blog articles, books, everything into Google Drive for the reasons I mentioned at the top of the show. But the Zotero plugin is actually really powerful. It's a very, very useful tool. So as you can see here with the example, I'm going to use that website that I captured earlier, showing you how the capture tools work within Zotero. So it's already in Zotero, it's in there already. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type some words and maybe learn how to spell whilst I'm typing on camera. And then as you can see here, I can start to add citations from certain articles. So I might include a quote or reinforce a particular point I'm trying to make and then back it up with some scientific literature or an article somewhere. And I can do this as I go through writing my articles. And this Zotero plugin works literally just by plugging it in, clicking it, and then searching for that particular citation, the article that you want to cite, or the book, or the PDF, or the video, or whatever. Then when you get to the end of this and you finish writing and you're happy with all the references and your articles coming to a conclusion, you can then include a bibliography straight from using that Zotero plugin. So this to me is a form of contribution. This is I'm writing an article based on stuff that I know, or stuff that I'm reading and researching, and I'm going to reinforce that with my own evidence, but support that by other maybe scientific articles, which is what I try to do a lot in Cultivated Management, is actually find genuine science insights that can help us, not just strong opinions. So step in the cheap notebook. So I'm addicted to Domestika. I'm going to do a video on Domestika and how addictive it is. But let's say I'm studying how to do storytelling through short films, which is a course I've sat recently. This course was really good, really enjoyed it. Now, while I'm watching the course, I've got my cheap notebook open and I'm scribbling notes. They don't have to be super readable for anybody other than myself. They're my notes. They're the kind of first draft as we go through this process. I'm just scribbling stuff down. I'm making notes, actions, connections, doodles, drawings. Really, I'm just capturing what's coming at me in my own words. I like to write them down, and this is where I've really struggled a little bit with Zotero, where I'm actually reading PDF documents online and annotating, which is a brilliant, brilliant method, but I actually really miss just writing stuff. And I think there's a benefit of using your pen, paper, and mind to capture things in your own notes, in your own style, in your own way. I think that's really super powerful. And I've actually found myself printing some articles from Zotero and then creating paper notes from it and then just storing them back together again. But anyway, coming back to this particular Domestika video, I'll be scribbling some notes, writing it all down. It's all good stuff. Now what I'll do after using these is I'll process these notes. Now it makes it a little bit trickier, obviously. Now you've got analog stuff that you've got paper now. It's not digital. So how do we do this? Well, here's what I do. I take pictures of the notes, and then I get those pictures obviously onto my computer somehow. AirDrop works pretty well if you're a Mac Apple user. Then I go and find the video on the Domestika site, and again click that Zotero button, capture all of the relevant citations and links and all the other good stuff that Zotero does so well. Now I have that in a collection somewhere. In this example, it's to process. Now I can grab that screenshot, the image that I've taken, and I can drag that onto the item and it gets stored next to it. So I've now got the video on Domestika that I've been studying. I've got all of the metadata, and I've got my learning notes as well. So that's what I do. Works really, really well. And then finally, we've got these A3 learning notes. I haven't mentioned too much about these. I've already done a video on these before. If you head to cultivatedmanagement.com and search for learning notes, you'll find some of the ones that I've already uploaded onto there. But essentially, this is an A3 notebook. This is where I take the output of all of the stuff that we've done so far. So I've captured all of this information, I've crunched it, I've curated it and crunched it. I've then maybe even contributed this back in the form of an article or, a tutorial or a workshop or whatever, or even at work. Bringing these new behaviors and skills into the workplace is a form of contribution. So I've done that process, but now I actually want to keep something that's a synthesized version of some of this information for my own posterity. Now, these are partly because I just really like stationery, and these A3 notes are just a lot of fun for me to create on a personal level. There's a bit of a sentimental piece here as well. I've got 3 kids, and then maybe when I'm gone, they stumble across this A3 notebook, and it's full of wealth of information and knowledge and ideas that they can use in their own lives as they grow as kids into adults and then adults into old people. Man, that sucked saying that sentence. But you know what I mean? There's a sort of sentimental piece here. But there's also a piece where actually this could be a form of contribution, as you've seen on the website. Once I've done some of these notes, I do tend to share them. Not all of them, but they're also just a really way of sort of like, this is the final output. There's the articles, the insights, the information, the scrappy, cheap notebook notes that I've made. There's pictures and images and all sorts of just scrappy stuff. And this feels like a kind of logical, clean, final output about that particular source, or sometimes about an entire topic. I might bring in different sources into an A3 learning note. But ultimately, it's just a really nice way of coming to a conclusion on that piece of work. So closing out, very, very quick summary, almost everything personal related, anything referencey, anything to do with life goes into Joplin. Anything to do with learning and professional development and cultivating my brain, so to speak, goes into Zotero. Anything to do with contribution is usually done in Google Drive using that Zotero plugin, which is really helpful. And then there's the A3 notebooks as well, which is a sort of finalized, fine-tuned, polished, lovely end version of what it is that I've been learning. So there you go. There's my personal knowledge management system circa 2024, and it's changed a lot over the last 10 years. The video I did a couple of years back was using, I think, Evernote or Nimbus. I can't actually remember. But again, that's just tools that have changed. The process itself hasn't. We capture stuff, we curate that, and we ask difficult questions about what we want to do with it. We tag it, we store it, we put it into its relevant place. We then potentially crunch that stuff and turn it into knowledge. You know, information in action is knowledge. And that's what I'm all about. I want to develop as an individual. I want to become better, smarter, and I want to change the very fabric of who I am based on what I'm learning. And therefore I have to crunch it, I have to try it, do it, put it into practice, learn it. And then once I've done that, my goal with Cultivated Management and this Creative Soul Project's YouTube channel is to then contribute that back and share that with my own reflections and insights, not just word for word, here, there, I read this book, here's what it said, but something on top of that, my own personal contribution back. So there you go, that's my personal knowledge management system. Bit geeky, but I do love this stuff, and I very, very much look forward to seeing you in the next video. And between now and then, if you check out cultivatedmanagement.com, we've got zines, books, magazines, podcasts, there's a newsletter, and there's a ton of articles all around learning, leadership, management, communication, better business. So with that, speak to you in the next video. You take care of yourselves.